to the microeconomics series. And in this series 9, I am going to discuss on the topic production, which I've already discussed in the microeconomics series 8. Production, as we see from the producer's or seller point of view or the buyer point of view, has been discussed through the law of variable proportion in the previous slide about the short-run production function. In this series, I'll be discussing about the long-run production function. As already told, the production is a process of transforming input into output, or in other words, the resources used transformed into goods or services that are produced. Production function depends on the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. And we can see that land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur, transformation of these inputs into output, and output can be cars, houses, foods, computers, edible items, clothing, shoes, bags, etc. It can be any goods or services. Production function with respect to the time period has been short run and long run. Short run is a period of 1 year and below, and long run period more than 1 year. As we all know, that law of variable proportion is applicable in short run production function because it is related with a returns to a factor. While the laws of returns to scale relates to the study of input-output relationship in the long run, assuming all inputs to be variable. Production analysis was based on this concept of variable input and fixed input, and we all know this fixed input concept is only applicable in short term. Returns to scale. This is a long run production function, and in this returns to scale, all the factors of production are variable. So we see the changes in output as all factors changes in the same proportion. So in the long run, output can be increased by increasing all factors in the same proportion. Generally, laws of returns to scale refers to an increase in output due to increase in all factors in the same proportion. And this returns to scale concept has been showing the degree of change in output caused by change in quantities of all inputs in a fixed proportion. And as I told you all, in this, all inputs are variable. Instead of all factors, when a relationship specifies change in output as a result of given change in quantity of only one factor of production, while keeping the others unchanged, this is called returns to a factor. And when all the factors are being changed, they are known as returns to a scale. So this returns to a scale has 3 ways in which output can be increased. Or when all inputs are changed in the same proportion, the total product may respond in 3 possible ways: increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale, and diminishing returns to scale. Or in other words, output may increase more than proportionally to an increase in input, which is called the increasing returns to scale. Output may increase proportionately to an increase in input, that is constant returns to scale. Or output may increase less than proportionately to an increase in input, that means diminishing returns to scale. Now let us discuss all these scale. So increasing returns, constant return, and diminishing return. These are the 3 returns to scale. First of all, we take the example of increasing returns to scale. Increasing returns to scale means when we are getting a total product more than the percentage increase in the factor input. Suppose if I increase my input by 20%, that 20% input increase is giving me 45% increase in output. This is the increasing returns to scale. The reason behind the increasing returns to scale is the economies of scale. Economies of scale is the advantage of large scale production, which will be discussed in the later slides. So the increasing returns means increase in input is less than the increase in output. We can say it in this way also. We are increasing only input by 20%, but the output is increasing by more than 45%. So this is increasing returns to scale. Constant returns to scale, here the amount of input change and the amount of output change is same. If I increase my input by 10%, the output will also increase by 10%. And here it is called that economies of scale are counterbalanced by diseconomies of scale. Economies of scale are counterbalanced by diseconomies of scale means whatever economies of scale is there is offset by the diseconomies of scale. Economies of scale, earlier told, it is advantage of large scale production. Diseconomies of scale are disadvantage of large scale production. Diminishing returns to scale. This means the amount of change in input is greater than percentage change in output. That means, suppose if we increase the input by 40%, the output will increase only to 20%. So this is diminishing returns because output increases in a smaller proportion. And here the reason behind is diseconomies of scale outweighs economies of scale. That means the advantage of large scale production is less than the disadvantage of large scale production. Or in other words, the disadvantage of large scale production is greater than the advantage of large scale production. So this is the three scale of returns to scale. The reason behind, as I told you all in the earlier slide, the internal economies of scale and even the external economies of scale. This is the advantage. When we get increasing returns, this economies of scale is greater than the diseconomies of scale. And economies of scale is of two types, internal and external. Internal is leading to the firm itself, while external is the external environment. So just dealing with all the bullet points which have been shown here. First of all, managerial, financial, technical, marketing, etc. There are many economies of scale because once you change your scale of production or expand your large scale production, you hire good managers, you have got a good system, even your financial base also expands because when you are having a large scale production, you are in a sound financial position also and you are able to take financial help from government or non-government institutions based on your large scale production performance. So you are able to get the finance also in a very easy way. You can adopt good technology also. You can your distribution channel can also be well developed because you're on a large scale production. Apart from that, if in the previous series, I've talked about the specialization of labor and division of labor, which adds to the large scale production. So these are few internal economies of scale. Apart from the external economies of scale, that means the resource and development, economies of concentration, your industry is expanding, or your economies of specialization is there, or the government is giving you some initiative, or the industry as a whole is giving you some profit. So these are external factors. Diseconomies of scale of production is your disadvantage because once you start producing on a very large scale, you have the prime problem which comes in is your management and coordination problem. And that leads to production diseconomies, marketing diseconomies, and financial diseconomies. Apart from the inefficient management, because managing large scale production is really a difficult thing until unless it is managed in a very sound system. It cannot be feasible to have a economies of scale. Rather, we start having a diseconomies of scale. That is disadvantage of large scale production because we know even the proper coordination of all the four factors of production is also, it's very difficult. Or even among the factors of production, like if I talk about the labor only, when you many times you must have heard of the strikes, industrial lockouts, trade unions. So these are some of the internal diseconomies. Apart from that, external diseconomies like diseconomies of pollution, extra burden on the infrastructure. Many times the factors of production also start having their high prices. So this is also diseconomies of high factor prices. So these are the disadvantages of large scale production. And depending on the situation of economies and diseconomies, we define the increasing returns to scale, diminishing returns to scale, or constant returns to scale. So to conclude, the distinction between returns to a variable factor and returns to scale is there. We have already discussed the returns to variable factor in the series 8, and in the series 9 we have discussed about the returns to scale. We have come to the conclusion that the returns to variable factor is related to short run production function, while the returns to scale is the long run production function. Returns to a variable factor is restricted to only one factors of production being varied, that is labor, while in the returns to scale, all the factors of production are being varied. Then the third point of distinction is that there is a change in factor proportion. Factor proportion is changed in the returns to variable factor, while in the returns to scale, there is no change in factor ratio. And fourthly, in the returns to variable factor, there is no change in scale of production because here all the factor inputs are not changed, while in the returns to scale, there is a change in the scale of production because all the factor inputs are varied in the same proportion. So, students, now we conclude this production chapter. In the next series, I'll be discussing on the cost chapter because cost chapter is related to this production cost because whatever we produce has a cost. We hire the labor, we hire the capital, we hire the land, and we hire the entrepreneur. All the four factors of production have a cost of rendering their services. So in the next series, I'll be discussing on the cost. Till then, have a nice day. Thank you.